Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the Community Foundation, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to our second Partnering for Good breakfast. For those of you who do not know me, I am Danita Dehaney, and I will be celebrating my second year as President and CEO next month. So how about that? We are excited to welcome you this morning to our second event of the season that is exclusive for professional advisors. And we call this series Partnering for Good because that's really the Community Foundation's value proposition. We are here to help you and to help you help your clients amplify their philanthropy on issues that challenge every corner of our counties. We believe that our power is our knowledge and our know-how. Not only do we know and understand the issues facing our neighbors and neighborhoods, we also know the nonprofit organizations who are on the front lines dealing with these issues every single day. Our nonprofit partners have been vetted, tested, and recommended thanks to a proven track record of success by the Community Foundation's rigorous standards. We stand ready to help your clients get closer to the causes that they care about most, and to help each of you also increase your own skills with your clients when it comes to ensuring that their giving is making a real difference. So I want to thank our sponsors for this event this morning, Tandy Robinson with Goldman Sachs, Leisha Snyder with Gunster. Where's Lisa? Oh, there she is. Hi, Lisa. John Lacey with Merrill Lynch, April Hicks with Carr, Riggs, and Ingram, and Chris Lasquerdo with Quantum Realty Advisors. Let's give them an applause. Did I leave anybody out? Or okay, thanks. Without your support, I'm sorry? Is Stacy here? Okay, so the names that I didn't call, I presume are not in attendance. Is that right, MK? Okay, super. But we still wanted to recognize them anyway. But let me just say this. Without your support, this event's not possible. So we thank you sincerely. I also want to thank the Women Leading for Good Committee, who actually helped us many months ago, working with Mary Catherine, to actually conceive and design this series of events. And without their brain power and their insight into what would enhance the value of the Community Foundation to your work, we also wouldn't be here. So thank you, women, for that. Many of these women are also part of the Community Foundation's own network of professional advisor ambassadors, the Philanthropic Advisory Council, or more commonly known as our PAC. And we also want to thank our PAC for helping us expand our impact alongside their clients and peers, and for encouraging so many of you to join us this morning. This is a great turnout. Thank you all for coming. Yes. So now it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to our Board of Directors Chair, Julie Fisher Cummings. How lucky could I get to have Julie as my first chair in this role during COVID in an industry with which I was unfamiliar? Let me just share a little bit about Julie as to why she is so special and why I was so lucky to have her as my first chair. First of all, Julie's work, as many of you know, bridges academia, public service, and policy reform. She has dedicated over 40 years to civic leadership locally and nationally through her positions at the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, the Lord's Place, the Jewish Federation for the Palm Beaches, the Jewish Women's Foundation for the Palm Beaches, the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, UPenn, and the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation. And we're actually really excited to have her colleagues and friends from the Fisher Foundation with us today. Thank you for coming. Oh, I'm not done. Julie is also the co-founder of the Promise Fund, the Love Light Fund, and the Florida Women's Funding Alliance. She is, without question, a visionary leader, a compassionate advocate, and my strategic partner in giving for good. Please help me in welcoming Julie Fisher-Thomas.
Thank you, Danita. When she said 40 years, that's because I'm so old. That's we're all here because we like to help others, and I'm really grateful to Danita. And it's been like, it feels a lot longer than 2 years for all the work you and your team have done, and I want to thank you. It's been really wonderful. I think we have one of our board members here, our newest board members here, and who's head of our philanthropy committee, and I just want to chip to Paula. Would you like to? And yes, I have the executive director and the vice president from the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation with us today, Doug Stewart and Cindy Wall. And I am truly privileged to welcome you on behalf of the board of directors. We are excited to host today's presentation because all of you in this room, the wealth advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, and everyone who's a professional advisor are critically important to helping the Community Foundation build on its 50-year legacy of philanthropic impact. We are your premier partner in our area to connect you and your client to the organizations and charitable vehicles that can help the whole region thrive. We know that our success depends on your ability to communicate confidently to your clients about our area's greatest needs and the most effective ways to address them. And we seek to assist you in helping your clients know that their philanthropy is making a difference. That's why we are so happy to have Miki Akimoto here with us today to give us the tools to guide the decision-making of your clients in a way that measures and evaluates what success looks like from multiple perspectives. Miki is the Chief Impact Officer at the National Center for Family Philanthropy. In her role there, she partners with the Council's Center's CEO to implement the organization's strategic plan, enhance sector partnerships, and ensure a strong measurement and evaluation plan. Let me just say, I served on the board of National Center for Family Philanthropy, and they really are the premier partner of everything around family foundations. And as we know, there's over like 40,000 family foundations in the country, and as it's been said, each family foundation is different. And the NCFP really is a great partner in helping you be able to understand what these family members need as they go forward. She integrates NCFP's revenue, relationship management, and program strategies, and oversees the center's programs, communication, and development teams. Miki has a long professional history in the philanthropic sector. Most recently, she served as a senior philanthropic strategist at Bank of America's private bank. In that role, she provided consultation and support for family foundations and major nonprofits regarding their governance, grant-making, and impact strategies. Prior to BOA, Miki was vice president and then acting president of Philanthropy Massachusetts, the regional association of foundations, much like our Florida Philanthropic Network. And it helped foundations and donors in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. She also served as the first director of grant management for the Annie Casey Foundation and as a program officer at the Corporation for National and Community Service, helping AmeriCorps. I don't know if anyone knows AmeriCorps, but they really help young people become civil servants in a very powerful way. She serves on a number of national and regional nonprofits, including chairing the board of Full Frame Initiative. Miki holds a Bachelor of Political Science degree from Stanford University and lives in Massachusetts. We are so grateful and privileged to have you with us today. Please help me in welcoming Miki.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that lovely and generous introduction of both myself and the National Center for Family Philanthropy. And as noted, I do live in Boston, and so being here is both delightful and delightful. So thank you for the lovely warm welcome and the lovely warm weather. So today I'm going to take you through something called the family giving life cycle. As Julie mentioned, there's sort of an old trope in the field that when you've seen one family foundation, you've seen one family foundation. I'm about to destroy that by saying, in fact, that there are commonalities. However, this is useful for you as advisors, I hope, and we'll start with that. Let me see if I can do this well. Here we go. I am going backward, apparently. Here we go. So quickly, about the National Center for Family Philanthropy. Julie gave a wonderful introduction about what we are, just a little bit more background. We're a 25-year-old organization that serves a vibrant network of philanthropic families throughout the country, and in fact, a handful internationally. But most of our members are US-based and focused on US grant making. And what we do is we provide them with a number of tools and resources, one of which I'm going to share with you this morning. And our purpose is really to elevate a conversation about effective family philanthropy. There are many family philanthropies out there, and they're doing wonderful jobs, and we can all do better. And so we're really trying to elevate good practices, conversations about how we can work together as philanthropies in partnership with nonprofits and so forth. We equip families to do this work. And we talk a lot about family philanthropy as opposed to family foundations, because, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, while it is true that foundations are still sort of the largest percentage of family philanthropic vehicles, the use of other vehicles like donor advised funds and so forth are growing rapidly. And so we really want to be holistic in our approach and not be dogmatic and say it only counts if it's a foundation. And so what we do is we equip families to really think about how to effectively do their philanthropy. We provide educational series, we do webinars, we do seminars, we do deep dive learning and action cohorts where people come together over the course of several months and take a particular topic and really tackle it as a cohort in a learning model. We hold national conferences. We just had our conference in October with over 600 people attending to talk about philanthropy in all of its shapes and forms. And we activate families. We are of the opinion that we need to put capital to work. We need to put capital to work effectively, and we need to think about how to do that investing. So that's a little bit about us. If you'd like to know more, I'd be happy to talk about that some more. And moving then on for today, I really want to talk a little bit about getting started with donors. As professional advisors, you may have a number of clients who really want to get started. And we're going to give you some tools and give you an overview of some of those beginning conversations, but then really take a deeper dive into helping clients that you work with thinking about and preparing for assessment. I know that a topic many people come up against is, how do I know I've made a difference? When I was an advisor at the Bank of America, and thank you, hi to some of my former colleagues in the room, I know this is something clients would ask, like, okay, we want to do this, but how do we know? And so we're going to give you some tools to think about that. And I will say that I'm going to break it twice for questions, but if there's something that's really burning, feel free to throw up your hand. I'm a pretty flexible presenter, and I don't want people to be like ruminating on something if I could answer a quick question for you. I also know that I talk very rapidly, and so I'm happy to slow down and answer questions as we go. So getting started with families. You all know this, but I think it's important just to remember to put stuff in context that we're at this major moment of inflection. There is the wealth transfer that is happening. Trillions of dollars are due to change hands from the silent and baby boomer generations into hands, including baby boomers, Gen X, who always get overlooked, millennials, Gen Z, et cetera. And a number, a huge percentage of that is already tagged to go to philanthropic causes. And so this is a moment where advisors such as yourself are more critical than ever in helping to think about, direct, and shape how that giving happens, and the importance of partnering with community foundations, other foundations, to think about what's the best thinking right now in terms of how to make that transfer effective. We also know from our work, and I know from my work in advising, that people want to engage the next generation wants to be engaged, the next generations want to be engaged, but there's not always a good way to think about how to do that. And so this becomes a source of indecision, or I don't know how to start this, so I'm going to wait to make this decision until later. And it's really critical that we begin those conversations now about how to bring generations together, or how you want to think about what happens. And then the other point I'll make, you may all be familiar with this study, but a number of years ago, the Lilly School of Family Philanthropy, in partnership with Bank of America, did a study about advisors. And what people uniformly came back with high net worth clients saying is, we want our advisors to talk to us about philanthropy, and they're not doing it. And the fascinating thing is this, we interviewed both advisors and high net worth clients. And the high net worth client said, we want this conversation to happen. We want this conversation to happen early. It's not happening. We talk to the advisors, they're like, oh yeah, we're talking to our clients about philanthropy. So there's a disconnect there, which you can help bridge. And I think what happens is, in many cases, clients want to talk about their values. They want to talk about how to do their philanthropy, the causes they want to give to, and advisors are talking about tax breaks. And while tax breaks are important, they are not, in fact, the driving force behind the majority of people's giving. And so it's really important that as advisors, you're thinking about all sides of the philanthropic equation, as it were. So again, telling you things you may already know, but want to just ground this a little bit. And the other thing that we have seen, and we're actually in the middle of a study about this, is that people, even with the best of intentions, get stuck. They want to start their philanthropy and they don't know how. And some of the common themes that we're hearing coming up are things like people are afraid to make mistakes. These are folks in many cases who have been really successful in their business life or other things, and they're afraid that they can't get started because what if they make a mistake in philanthropy? Or I'm a public figure, what will people think? And so this is another thing that happens, is that on the flip side of not want to make a mistake, the world can just seem really overwhelming. Like, there's so many challenges out there, how do I narrow in? And again, some of the tools we're going to give you today can help you address that. So I'm not going to finish reading slides to you because you all can read, but sort of moving along. One of the things that when I was an advisor and talking to other financial advisors, other kinds of high net worth advisors, is how do I get started talking to my clients about this? And one of the things we would talk about with them is asking clients what they want from their legacy. What is it that you want to leave in the world? And that often leads into conversations about philanthropy or leaving some kind of positive impact on the world. What is it you want your wealth to do? How do you want to put your wealth to work? Ask people about what they're volunteering for. Are they serving on any boards? And if so, why those boards? What causes are interesting to them? So those are some of the just things that we used to talk about to get people started. And another way to get people started is to help them work through some tools. And so this leads into the next part of my presentation, which is about the family giving life cycle. So as I said, the National Center for Family Philanthropy works with hundreds of families, thousands of philanthropists all across the country. And what we have observed is that there are 7 distinct points of inflection at which people going through philanthropy, families going through philanthropy, will step. And these are what we call the family giving life cycle. Now, this is laid out in what seems like sort of a linear fashion because that's just how the written word works. In point of fact, you don't have to do these in any particular order, although I will argue in a minute that there's one that you need to start with in particular. And these are also points of inflection where you go through them more than once in most cases. That it is an iterative process, which is why we're using this circle graphic, that as the world evolves, as your family evolves, as generations come on, there are questions that you need to revisit. And what I'm about to talk you through is a set of tools that are free on our website. You can download them. And for each of these stages, there is what we call a primer, which is sort of an overview of the topics. And each of those primers, I printed one out just to give you an idea of what they kind of look like. They're usually about 30 pages or so. Don't get scared. There's a lot of graphics and things. And they lay out what are sort of the fundamental questions in each of these stages. There's an extending the fundamental section where you can go deeper into each of those issues, and then a series of worksheets that you can work through on your own or with clients to help you really think through the questions that we're posing. Because, again, when you've seen One Family Foundation, you've seen One Family Foundation, and each family is going to have a different set of answers to those prompts, but it's a good way to get started. So if we think about the first stage, and this is the one where I do think it's really important to start, it's about philanthropic purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? And so within this is really where you're asking people to step back and reflect on why are we doing this? What motivates us? What are our values, both individually and as a collective family? What is it that we hope to see? You may think about this as a vision, mission, or vision or mission statement. These are often the words that are used to describe these kinds of things. And how are you going to really name and then ground your work in your values as you go forward? And having that philanthropic purpose North Star is really important for everything else that comes afterwards, because that form follows function. And so once you define what it is that you're trying to do, then you can make a series of decisions about how to support that work. But it's really hard to make some of these decisions if you don't know what you're going to do in the first place. And so that's why I will argue that you really always need to start and go back to and ground yourself in your philanthropic purpose. Take time. This is also a place where you don't want to rush. You don't want to treat this as some kind of checkbox exercise, because this is the bedrock on which a lot of other things are going to stand. So the next question is, once you've decided what it is you want to do, what are the vehicles that you're going to use to get you there? And as I talked about earlier, although family foundations, private foundations are still very much in use, we're seeing other vehicles come into play. Donor advised funds, LLCs. Some of the members in our network are actually using C4s as well in order to advance advocacy and policy agendas. And so really thinking about deploying your capital. There's also how are you going to use your investments? If you're going to endow a foundation, are you and how are you going to align your investments with your mission? And so there's a series of questions that walk through here in terms of impact vehicles and structures of what are the short and long-term things that you're trying to accomplish, and what are the vehicles that are going to get you there. And certainly as advisors, I'm sure you understand all of the technical and legal differences between a donor advised fund and a private foundations and the advantages. And this is where, once you define your purpose, you can really think through what are the vehicles that are going to get us where we need to go, and is it a staged process? Do we start with one and add another over time? Or as we're growing, for instance, one of the things that we see are families who have a private foundation creating donor advised funds as a way to bring on the next generation. And so they're using donor advised funds as a way to give access to younger family members or rising generations to begin making some grant making decisions, not necessarily within the structure of the foundation, depending on how that goes. So these are things to think about in this area in terms of impact vehicles and structures. Governance is the next big thing. And governance is really about practices, policies, people, and principles. We like alliteration at the center, and so we try to get that in wherever we can. But in all seriousness, this is the decision-making structure. Who is going to make decisions? How are they going to make those decisions? And when are they going to make those decisions? And so obviously, formally, you can think about governance as including things like bylaws, articles of an organization, internal policies. But it's also the culture that you create. How are you setting and creating a culture of governance where people are holding themselves accountable? How are you naming to whom and to what are we accountable? And how are you creating a structure where people feel like they have the ability to really engage with their full voices and full selves? And so within governance, there's this piece around going back to your purpose and values, how are your values expressed in your governance? And then what are the structures within governance that you need in order to assure that you've got agendas for board meetings that work to keep you on task for your vision and mission? What are the bylaws structures? How are you thinking about things like term limits? If you're part of a very large multi-generational family, for example, are you instituting term limits so that more people's voices have a chance to get pulled in some way or another? So governance is a really important piece, and it's not just, again, the checkbox exercise of making sure that you've got bylaws and that you're filing your IRS governance forms, although those are also important. I would never advocate to not file your IRS forms. Impact strategies and tools. And so we're using this sort of slightly jargony phrase to really remind us that we have a full range of tools at our disposal within giving to make a difference. There's obviously grants. Like, we're all familiar with giving grants or donations or gifts. There's that straight out, we're going to give cash for a purpose. But beyond that, what are the strategies that we're employing? How are we thinking about partnering with both community and nonprofits? How are we going to be as grant makers? Because this is another piece where there's always room for improvement and thinking and evolution. There's what I would consider a more old school model of, we're going to tell you what you should do and give you money to do that to the nonprofit. What we're recognizing is that foundations and grant makers, even with the best intentions, may not always be experts in the subjects in which they want to make grants or the topics in which they want to make a difference. And so there are movements now like trust-based philanthropy and the Fund for Shared Insight, which is really talking about how to embed listening practices in your grant making, where we're recognizing the importance of being in dialogue and relationship with community, with nonprofits, with the experts on the ground who can tell us more clearly than anybody what is the change that they need to see in their lives, in their neighborhoods, in their communities that will make a difference. And I think at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is make a positive impact on the world. And the importance of listening and thinking about the full range of strategies and tools that we can employ is really important. And so here it is grant making, it's how you're using your investments, it's thinking about partnering with other funders and collaborative funds so that you might be able to leverage, if you're a smaller foundation or you just want to learn, how do you pool your funds and knowledge together to have an impact as a group, which can have a lot of positive effects for nonprofits as well as the funders. How are you going to think about policy? Are you going to bring in advocacy or policy into your strategies? You've got voices as donors, and so how do you want to exercise all of the tools that you have at your disposal? And again, this doesn't have to happen overnight. It can be a strategy that you build over time. But this is also going to have a lot to do as you think about your strategies and what you're going to measure, and so those two things are intimately tied. Assessment and learning. This is another piece where part of the reason we exist is at the National Center is that we really believe in ongoing learning, and that one of the things that we talk about is the importance of really creating and maintaining and supporting a culture of curiosity, a culture of learning, and really what's under that in a way is humility, that all of us can be lifelong learners. I'm the daughter of public school teachers, so this is a principle that's particularly near and dear to my heart. But how do we think about how are we going to assess, and how are we both going to assess ourselves and our operations, as well as the impacts of our work? And so thinking about how are we building this culture, how are we going to learn, how are we going to conduct due diligence, and how do we establish routines to make sure that we're continuing learning? And so for instance, again, going back to governance, are you building board agendas where there's a learning piece of that agenda each time? Are you bringing in an expert or a community partner or going on site visits where you as a board or group of governing people are continuing to learn both from each other as well as from the broader community? Operations and management. Every type of charitable vehicle requires some form of administration. It could be very light or it could be fairly heavy depending on the form that you take. But there's an importance here about thinking about right-sizing and scaling your operations and management to fit what it is that you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. There is also the ability to think about how your operations are reflecting your values. If you have values about integrity and transparency, how are you, for instance, if you have a foundation, being transparent about your operations, your finances? Are you making sure that your 990s and audits are getting posted in a routine way? Are you being clear about how you're hiring and what you're hiring? Another piece that's happening a lot with foundations right now is, again, this recognition that we need community voices at the table when grant make decisions are being made. And so I was just recently talking to a group of CEOs of very large foundations who were saying that what they're recognizing is that there's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because many of these foundations are hiring community leaders of local nonprofits or movement leaders from their communities to run their grant-making programs, but now they're stripping leadership out of the community. And so how do you balance that out? And so one of the foundations is saying that they now have this policy where if they hire a community leader, the nonprofit from which that leader is being drawn gets a grant to cover transition and recruiting costs to replace that leader. So there's those kinds of things that can seem small, but thinking through all the consequences and how that plays out. And again, this underlying thing about what are your values, what are your mission, what are your vision, your purpose, and is everything aligned behind that? And then succession and legacy. This is another big one where we think about bringing on next generations. We answer questions about how long do you want your foundation or philanthropic vehicle to exist? Foundations, there used to be an assumption of perpetuity. Julie mentioned I used to work at Bank of America, and one of my initial jobs was in what we call the discretionary trust department. And these are trusts where Bank of America is the last trustee standing. And in the Boston office, they date back to 1676. So there can be real perpetuity. Is that useful? Does that meet your purpose? Maybe it does. Or do you think if I deploy my capital faster, we can really do a full court press on a particular issue and it's really important to spend out? And there's a range of opinions about this, a range of approaches, but those are the kinds of questions that you should be thinking about and revisiting. We have a number of families in our network that haven't made the decision, but they've said, we're going to revisit this question every 5 years because we're not sure, or we're going to leave this into the hands of the next generation. Again, multiple approaches to this. And also the importance of defining your legacy, of beginning to give guidance if you are thinking about bringing on the next generation to those next generations so that people aren't left trying to figure out what it was that grandma intended or what it was that you hoped you intended. Again, going back to these discretionary trusts, we had trusts where literally the language to us was make grants at your discretion. And we had zero guidance. And I used to joke that short of a Ouija board, I really had no way of knowing what it was that the donor intended. Don't leave your descendants with Ouija boards. It's kind of my recommendation for the morning. So that takes me through the stages of the overall family giving life cycle. Again, to say all of these resources are free on our website. The National Center for Family Philanthropy's website is ncfp.org. And you can download the workbooks and the worksheets, and I'm actually going to get one of those handed out shortly before I start my next part of my presentation. But in the meantime, I want to stop and see if there's any questions overall about NCFP, about the family giving life cycle. Could you take one, Mr. Bass? Thank you. No questions. I've done you a submission. You need more coffee. Yes, ma'am.
Private. Are you finding that people are opening family foundations at an equal or greater rate now, or is it more the donor advice fund? And is there any way to keep the information private on a family foundation?
So a couple different questions in there. I don't actually know if I have the most recent stats about the relative rate of foundations being created versus donor advised funds. My sense is that on a growth rate, more donor advised funds are being opened. And that's partly because there's such a heavy administrative cost, relatively speaking, to running a private foundation, and such a lower administrative costs, relatively speaking, for running a donor advised fund, that I think many people are gravitating towards those or being advised towards those. There's also the differential tax break, which comes up that I've seen as a decision for people with really major liquidity events. So that's sort of a technical wrapper on that. But I'm seeing both still being created, kind of depending on people's intent. And in terms of the keeping something private in the family foundation, the answer is a qualified yes. And this is going to get really technical really fast, probably. So as you probably know, on the 990 PF, which is the IRS filing that private foundations make, you must disclose who your trustees are. That's a question of law. And so if you are the trustee of a family foundation, then you must be listed there. I've seen a couple of cases where families did not want their names on the 990 PF, and so they would name a corporate trustee as the trustee, and then the bylaws were written in a way that gave the family advisory rights on the grant making. Now, legally, I'm not a lawyer, so please do not take this as legal advice, but I think there's a lot of questions that can get raised in terms of the relative power if you've got a corporate trustee or outside trustees that the family could, in fact, be voted out at some point. And so it's a little bit of a needle to thread in my estimation. Again, not a lawyer, but just something I've seen happen. So that's the closest I've seen to being able to be private, on a private foundation. Yes, ma'am.
Economically speaking, where do you feel is kind of the right starting point for a private foundation?
The $5 million, $10 million, or $20 million question, depending on who you're talking to. I would say that I would start again with the question of what is it you're trying to accomplish? And will a private foundation give you advantages that a donor advised fund wouldn't? I think it's also running the ratios of what's it going to cost you every year to file your 990, to do the accounting required, those kinds of things. So I can't give you a hard number. I will note that going back to purpose, one of the things I used to talk about with my clients is that with donor advised funds, you're giving up legal control, and that may not be personally something you're willing to do. There's sort of that personal style question. Also, donor advised funds can only give to a certain range of things, typically other public charities, or there's a couple of other things, right? Private foundations have this ability to give to any kind of entity that there is, if it's for a charitable purpose. And so if you're someone who's very entrepreneurial, very innovative, the private foundation vehicle may be more satisfying for you from that perspective. So I think it's more a question of what are you willing to spend administratively. I don't think that there's a bright line, my personal opinion. I can have time for one more question. I can see Mary Kay giving me don't go too long. Okay, so I'll move on and I'll break again for questions towards the end. So I wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the assessment and learning module, which is where we talk about impact in many ways. And I've just handed out at your, the paper that you got around is an example of the kinds of worksheets that we have available in the guides that we have on our website. And so as you think about, if clients are asking you, like, how do I assess, how do I know I have an impact, what is it that you're assessing? And I think that there's 3 things that we talk about that you should be thinking about as you think about impact assessment, et cetera. First of all, internally, your process evaluation of how are we doing as an entity, as a partner, as a grant maker? What are our operations like? What are you willing to do in terms of assessing internal? There's the piece around your philanthropic strategy, which is, what are the tools that we're putting on the field? How are we going about our work? How are we thinking about our theory of change, if you will, in terms of if we make grants in this area, we expect to see this kind of outcome. And then there's the question of your partners, that is, or your grantees, how are they doing? What are they seeing? What do they need to be successful? What outcomes are you seeing from the work that they're doing? And so those are sort of thinking about categories of, it's not just a grant report from your grantee, but really thinking in the full frame of what is the work that you're doing, and are all the pieces sort of working together in a strong way. So in the slides I initially given you, we talked about some reflection questions. And the other piece here I would encourage you to think about is, as you think about assessing, what are the principles that you are going to guide your assessment plan? In other words, are you seeing this as a very business-like kind of strategy, or are you thinking about this as assessing the partnership, the overall relationship that you have with your nonprofits, and again, thinking about your overall values and making sure that those values are reflected in the way that you're going about your work. And another fundamental question in assessment is, to whom are you accountable? As you're thinking about impact, what is the accountability? Are you accountable to yourselves? Are you accountable to the community? Because that then begins to open the doors of, if you're thinking about at the end of the day, we're accountable to the community for having a better impact on education, on healthcare, pick your issue. What is the community defining as success? What is the community saying will make a difference, and that they would say, yes, access to healthcare is better, yes, education is better, rather than your view as a funder about what you think makes the difference there. And again, talking about, as I said earlier, thinking about how are you listening to and relating to your nonprofit partners and the community at large in the way that you're going about your assessment. I've talked about some of these other points already, and the one piece I would talk a little bit about is thinking about what kind of assessment best fits your needs. So this is the other thing is, as you go about grant making, as your clients think about grant making and measuring success, there can be a very narrow view that's out there, like, randomized controlled trial. No, that's not necessarily the best way about going things. And it's a question both about right-sizing how it is you're going about your work, and also thinking about what type of measurement makes sense here. So if we think about assessment goals, sorry, this is maybe a little bit smaller type than is useful, but I think we can share the slides afterwards, so you'll get them all. If you really think about this, you're trying to inform your strategy. You're trying to monitor the results of what it is that you're doing. You're trying to understand what impact has happened, but this is all within the context of continuous improvement. I think this is also the important thing, is thinking about evaluation and assessment as a learning tool rather than a punitive or monitoring or a win-lose kind of strategy. That the kinds of problems that philanthropy is trying to tackle did not happen overnight. They're not going to be solved with a 6-month, $5,000 grant. And so thinking about how are you right-sizing what it is that you're asking people to do. We talk about this 5-step process, which is really to define success. And so this starts with what is success going to look like, and being realistic about that. Setting realistic expectations that with the amount of money that you're putting into a particular issue, what is a realistic outcome? And really then making sure that you've aligned your resources to get there. And you're thinking through what it is that makes sense, weighing out some of the things that could challenge or pull back from an outcome that you're hoping to get. What are the potential threats? Monitoring progress and evaluating results, and thinking again about what is the way to do that. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And then considering sharing your learning. And so in thinking about monitoring your results, there's a lot of different ways that you can get stuff. You can go observe, like if you are someone who is funding community parks, you can go walk through those parks and see, are they looking better? Is there less trash? Whatever it is that you're funding for. You can hear from your grantees. You can sit down with your grantees and hear from them about what's changed, what's improving, or you can get a written report. And again, what I was talking about earlier in terms of the trust-based philanthropy, what we're seeing is that funders are taking a different type of strategy. It was always the 20-page written report. And a group that was first known as the Grant Managers Network, now known as Peak Grant Making, actually did an assessment that showed that on average, it was taking nonprofits about $1,000 worth of time and resources to write a report. And if you think about that against a $5,000 or $10,000 grant, that's a huge percent of the grant just being put towards getting results back in, which is probably not the best use of resources all the way around. And so one of the funders we work with is now inviting nonprofits to lunch once a year, just to talk to them about how things are going, what more supports they need to be successful, what the successes were in this year, what are the challenges coming up. Others are allowing someone who funds it more remotely, people can send in a video update. They can do a little video update, post it up, and rather than having to write a report. And so being creative in how it is you're thinking about measuring results, and again, aligning the realistic expectations about what you can expect from the size of grant or the kinds of resources that you're providing people is something to think about, because we're a creative, innovative country. Like, we can think about better ways of doing things than writing a 20-page report, which nobody's going to read anyway. I'll tell a story about that at some point. And then the other piece, as you're thinking about assessment, is, as I talked about earlier, creating this culture of curiosity, this culture of learning. That in science, in bench science, we know failure is actually a result. And so thinking about if things didn't go exactly the way we expected them to, why? What did we learn from that? And how can we course correct and pivot to create the conditions for success as we move forward? And so, as I said, we've got a series of worksheets in the primer that you can work through. And what you'll see is if you do this online, these are all fillable PDFs, so you can do them that way if people are interested in doing that. And we link back to other resources within them if people want to ask questions. So with that, I'm going to stop and take questions.
Please help me welcome Miki for a great presentation. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Catherine Morales, and I'm the Vice President for Philanthropic Services here at the Community Foundation, and I, too, want to welcome you today. We still have time for questions, but I thought I would kick us off with a question. When it comes to assessing effectiveness of philanthropy, do you find that different generations in a family assess that differently?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to go back to the fact that every family is a little bit different, but what I would say is there's a couple of things that we're seeing happen. One of which is there's been a sea change in terms of the generations and what they're interested in. And that we're seeing a shift from older generations that were very much geographically focused and focused on community change in a particular location. It's not uncommon to see founding generations having cited their foundations where they grew up or where their business were, where they felt rooted, to the next generations really being interested in issues. And so I think what you're seeing is a difference in some cases, in many cases, where there may be a more granular on the ground sort of shift that people are looking for as opposed to looking for longer trends in terms of things like climate change or some of the issues that people are looking for. I think the other thing is that we're seeing rising generations asking much tougher questions about equity and how differences and disparities are being bridged.
Excellent. That was a great answer. Anyone else have a question for Miki? No?
Miki,
Yes, please.
Can you talk about the Resource Center at NCFP and the way people can find additional information there?
Absolutely. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Always a great chance to talk about our organization. So one of the things that we do is we collect resources. We do a lot of original thought leadership, such as we've just shared. We also collect a lot of resources related to family philanthropy. So if you go to ncfp.org and then click up on our Resource Center, Knowledge Center towards the upper right of the website, you get into a whole wealth of creation of resources for you. So we have something called content collections, where we've brought together the top 10 articles, say in a particular area like next gen onboarding or board chair succession planning. And also if you are a member of NCFP, you have access to our webinar library, so you can look at old webinars, stories from there. And there's also a search function where you can pull up articles that we've done. So thank you for asking.
Great question. Anyone else? Yes, Linda.
So just to follow on with the next generation, do you connect the families with facilitators to help that process, or do you actually do that through resources there at NCFP?
Yes, the answer is both. So great question, thank you. So one of the things that we do are what we call peer networks. And so we have a series of peer networks where, for instance, we have one for emerging leaders right now, emerging philanthropic leaders, where people between roughly the ages of 25 and 40 who are rising to positions of leadership in their family can connect with each other for a leadership learning journey. So we just did a session with a coach who was talking them through how to raise tough issues with your family. And he did it in an hour, which I thought was pretty impressive. We'll see back, how that all went when they meet next. We also, as a part of our services, connect families with each other. And so we could have a family call us up, for example, and say, we're bringing on a cohort of 20-something next-gen leaders. Can you connect us to other families who've done this recently about their successes and challenges? We also have a lot of written resources about these things. And we also have a group of advisors that we will connect people to if they are looking for like an outside strategic plan facilitator or something.
Thank you, Lynn. I think there was a question in the back. No? I have one last question then. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
I got a
Absolutely. One of the trends that we're seeing is the recognition by families, again, that they're not necessarily the experts in the issues that they want to tackle. And so we're seeing bylaws being written that include bringing on community members and setting out qualifications that, talk about people's issue knowledge of the local community, or certain kinds of lived experiences. The other thing that we're seeing are families who are beginning to grapple with and rewrite bylaws to bring term limits in, so there's a chance for more of the family members to rotate through. When you get to the 4th and 5th generation, you could have dozens, in some cases hundreds of descendants. And so, trying to do that, or creating formal advisory, or I hate the term junior board, but advisory boards of rising family members, so that using the governance to bring in other voices, for instance, that's one example.
Well, if there aren't any further questions, please help me thank Miki again for coming today. I also want to take a moment once again to thank our sponsors, the Women Leading for Good Committee, as well as our Philanthropic Advisory Council, and the entire team here at the Community Foundation for working together to bring this special program this morning. But I also want to take a moment to thank you for taking time today to help us with Partnering for Good and the series that is exclusively for you as professional advisors. As always, we offer our hand in partnership to you as experts in the community and the 4,000 local nonprofit organizations that work every day to address needs effectively and quickly. With our philanthropic services team, we stand ready to help inform and inspire your clients to give where they live, with a leader in philanthropy, the Community Foundation. Our goal today was to add a new tool to your toolbox as you talk to your clients about measuring the effectiveness of their philanthropy. And our door is always open to you to help you. On your tables, you will see that we have an additional toolkit, and we welcome you to take this with you. It's on your tables today. Again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We hope that you'll join us in the future, and thank you for coming.